The siege of Sarajevo, the Srebrenica massacre, who could forget the harrowing images of the Bosnian War? And yet tension is now building, some say, once again in the Balkans. Can a lasting solution be found? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. The Balkans, where ethnicities, religions and empires have been fought over for decades. Now Russia and the European Union, among others, are vying for position. Could this become the battleground of the new Cold War?
The Balkans on the brink, with separatist tensions threatening to spill over into yet another conflict. The region is considered a pawn in a power play between Russia, the United States and the European Union, with global superpowers looking to leverage their influence. Can the international community find a lasting solution? When Yugoslavia fell apart in the 1990s, tensions flared in its 6 republics. A brutal war in Bosnia came to a head with the siege of Sarajevo and the Srebrenica massacre in 1995. Peace was negotiated and Bosnia was carved into 2 ethno-territorial zones, the Republika Srpska for Bosnian Serbs and a Bosnian Federation for Bosnia's Muslims and Croats. But peace failed to hold in the region and tensions remained. Now the Balkans sits at the centre of a power struggle between Russia and the European Union. The EU is dangling the carrot of membership to Western Balkan countries in exchange for a crackdown on corruption and crime. But it set alarm bells ringing in the Kremlin, already wary of NATO expansion eastwards. In 2017, the tiny nation of Montenegro signed up to the Defence Alliance, following in the footsteps of Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia and Bosnia.
НАТО – это военно-политический блок, а не общество филателистов. Он ведет курс на проецирование силы, вовлечение в орбиту своего влияния все новых и новых государств.
Kremlin officials accuse the EU of applying pressure to Western Balkans countries and warn it could lead to a backlash reminiscent of the crisis in Ukraine.
Теперь вот в эту игру хотят втянуть и Балканы, кстати сказать, поставив балканские страны перед выбором. Либо вы с Западом, либо вы с Россией.
Shifting geopolitics have also thrown the future of the region into question. Britain's departure from the European Union has made membership of the bloc less appealing, as the EU can no longer guarantee the stability it once could. A tug of war between global powers now threatens peace in a troubled region. The Balkans has emerged from conflict deeply divided. Will it be allowed to forge its own future? Or will Russia and the West have the final say?
Pleased to say that joining us via Skype from Belgrade, we have Marko Stojanovic, who's Development Director at Belgrade's Western Balkans Institute. We move to Sarajevo, where we have Zlatko Lagumdzija, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Chairman of the Council of Ministers. With me at the round table in person, we have Kenneth Morrison, who was a specialist advisor to the House of Lords Western Balkans Inquiry, also Professor of Modern South East European History at De Montfort University. And making up our numbers, Neven Andjelic, who specialises in international relations and human rights studies at Regent's University, London. Thank you all very much indeed for coming in. I'm going to show a New York Times headline to Neven here, and I'll read it out so everybody can hear it. In a new Cold War with Russia, Balkans is becoming a testing ground. Do you agree with that sentiment?
It might be possible. The thing is that the West showed loss of interest in the Balkans since it securitized the region. The region stopped producing refugees going to the West, and there was a lack of interest. Meanwhile, the refocus was on Ukraine, on Middle East. A few years ago, when I was at the State Department in Washington, D.C., most of the experts, in-house experts, actually moved with their interest and their work to Ukraine. to countries of former Soviet Union. Very few remained interested in the Balkans.
So people have taken their eye off the ball.
That's right.
Zlatko, let me put this to you in Sarajevo. If the Russians are using this as a testing ground, what is their interest in the region?
Well, let me put it this way. If whoever, Russians, Turks, Chinese, whoever, if they are using Balkan as a testing ground, that's not so bad after all, because I think that the problem we have today is, among other things, because the West, USA and European Union, lost their momentum that they used to have in here. I mean, there are no doubts that Balkan's future is in Europe, in European integrations, as a member of EU. And I think that the fact that some other big players are putting more attention on Balkan, it may be good for us, not in order to become a new testing ground or battlefield in whatever sense, but because I hope that European Union and USA will take this seriously, having in mind that the vacuum was created because the non-presence of USA and European Union in an amount that we used to have it, especially because they are major players in implementation of Dayton peace.
So it would bring the focus.
For the last 10 years, we are talking about moving from Dayton phase to Brussels phase. So finally, Brussels have to show that they are serious geostrategic player, because this is no more about technical standards for Balkan. This is about geopolitical and political will of European Union to be a real global player. If they are not able, if they are not ready to close the missing link in Balkan, to close this 18 million people who live in 5 or 6 countries, if they don't want, if they are not able to make them being member of European Union, then European Union has a much bigger problem than European Union has itself. And we cannot get in a bigger mess than we used to be.
I suppose, to paraphrase, if I may, what we've just heard from Sarajevo, it is that, OK, at least the focus is now back on the Balkans. But what do you make of something that was written by Mark Galeotti from the Institute of International Relations? Russia is looking to the Balkans as a battlefield in its political war. Dangers in it, are there?
There are dangers. Russia, of course, are motivated by NATO membership of the Western Balkan countries, and of course they want to stop that from happening where they can. Croatia is already a member of NATO. Albania is already a member of the NATO alliance. The Russians would not like to see Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example, becoming a member of NATO.
And is that
Macedonia. I think in the case of Macedonia, it's much more likely in the near future. Montenegro, of course, joined last year, even though in the case of Montenegro, there wasn't a tremendous amount of public support. There wasn't a huge majority in support of NATO membership, but they joined NATO nevertheless. And of course,
so is Russia trying to destabilize this by sort of saying there are attractions in staying close to us, which are better for you than the pluses of joining NATO?
I don't think that Russia are necessarily looking to destabilize the region. I think what they're looking to do is to stop those countries who are not yet members of NATO to become members of NATO.
So to frustrate them, to frustrate the interests of the West, if you like.
Yes, and I think that Russia play the role of an opportunistic spoiler. And if we look at, for example, Russian investment in the region, it's relatively small in comparison to the EU, for example. The EU invests 10 times more than Russia does in the region. In many occasions, it's the perception of Russian involvement.
Yeah. Okay.
So because, for example, you have Sputnik as a very powerful...
Which funds their satellite TV stations, etc., etc.
Yeah, but they also have a network of correspondents and stringers in the Western Balkans, and this gives the impression that perhaps Russia are more engaged than they actually are. But if we're looking, for example, at foreign direct investment and so forth, it's relatively limited.
Okay, so we have soft power, we have a little bit of money, we have influence perhaps to frustrate the ambitions of others, those others being the Western alliances. Yeah. So Marko, let me come to you. If we're talking about the bigger historical picture, the Dayton Accord brought peace of a sort, much welcomed peace to the region, but you think, I believe, that has been a big, big burden.
Yes, I believe it is. I believe that in our view, what we can see in the Balkans, that we have today 5 or 6, unfortunately, incomplete states. within complete statehood, and that is the playground for any big power which would project any interest in this region. So I think that is the major threat for the region.
A playground, a dangerous place because of its history, and Dayton hasn't really allowed them in the Balkans to move onward.
To many extent, Dayton played its role to stop the conflict, but that was it. Since then, it was an obstacle for progress of the country.
Why is that? Why is it an obstacle?
It's a consociational arrangement of the country that basically prevents any group, whether it's ethnic group or political group, to win the elections, to dominate. The electoral system prevents progressive political forces of achieving any positive change in the country. Huge coalitions are formed of various nationalist political forces, and they keep Bosnia and Herzegovina as a country down. It is also of importance to note, I would say, that the mistake of the West was to think they encircled the Balkans originally. Everyone was a member of NATO except a few countries that remained in Western Balkans. And what I heard in Brussels in NATO circles earlier was it's a donut. Donut is not less worth, less sweet if there is a hole in it. And they only now realized they have to fill the hole because somebody else started trying to fill the hole with this impression of Russian presence.
Okay, so a dysfunctional group of 5 states. Peace was brought by the Dayton Accord, but no lasting solution was found. And it's the problems caused by that, perhaps, that are allowing this to become a playground for political ambitions. Marko, do you see any similarities with the NATO-Russian involvement in Ukraine and what then happened with the annexation of Crimea, the secessionist movement in the east, that the conflict that is there because of political ambitions and territorial ambitions, both of Russia and those countries? Do you see any similarity between that and what is happening in the Balkans?
Well, I see in the environment very much similarities. At first place, with regard to multi-ethnic structure of this region here. Balkans is one of the most multi-ethnic regions in the world, and if we have ethnical disputes, then we may see again the confrontations of the big power here, similar to those in the Ukraine. However, I think in the region there is no sufficient material, financial, or in the broadest sense, social capacity to carry out such a large-scale confrontation like in Ukraine. But I think we may see that scenario if there is a driving force coming from other centers.
Okay, we'll come to you, Zlatko, in just a moment, but I saw you nodding, Kenneth, at some of the points that were made there. Do you want to reinforce or
yes,
add?
I agree. I don't think the capacity for the kind of conflict that we saw in the 1990s is there. It's not possible again. In the 1990s, we were dealing not just with the disintegration of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, but also the disintegration of the 4th largest army in Europe at that time. And of course, many of those arms fell into the hands of the Serbs and the Bosnian Serbs, and allowed the Bosnian Serbs to wage the kind of campaign that they waged in Bosnia.
As a sidebar, can I just throw this one at you? There are suggestions that there is stockpiling of weapons in Serbia at the moment.
Yeah, there have been suggestions that there are stockpiling of weapons, actually, not just in Serbia itself, but in Republika Srpska. But again, I don't think that could lead to the kind of conflict we saw in the 1990s.
One would hope not. Yeah.
I think that should be excluded. Yeah, no, apologies. I think that kind of conflict could be excluded. But that doesn't mean to say that you couldn't have low-intensity conflicts, localized conflicts.
You see, what I'm wondering, Zlatko, if I can come to you in Sarajevo now, is we talk about a dysfunctional Dayton Accord, and we'll talk about what perhaps can be done to fix that in just a moment. But what it effectively means is you have a youth that is growing up having not known the conflict, and therefore not known the consequences of war, who might be more inclined to lean towards Russia perhaps rather than NATO. If Russia says, look, you know, we can solve your unemployment problems, or we can put in a strong man who can solve your unemployment problems, life was going to be easier under us than having to bend over backwards to perhaps join the European Union. Come and see us rather than them.
Well, let me put it this way: the war started, because something which we call today shared society, a multicultural, multi-ethnic society in this part of the world called Bosnia and Herzegovina, was heavily attacked from outside forces. And today we have in Hague the people who are actually criminals, war criminals, who are trying to destroy the very substance of multi-ethnicity in this country, is being trialed. Today, I think we have to understand that not only in this country, but in Balkan in general, and maybe even in Europe in a broader context, we are witnessing some kind of conflict in between two political approaches: inclusive society or shared society on one side, and exclusive and segregated society on the other side. So the future of European Union, as well as in Balkan, as well as in Bosnia and Herzegovina, is going back to the original values and ideas that this society was stable about and this European Union was about, which is unity in diversity, and really not as a motto, but as a way of living and way of working and living together. In that context, I think it is very important to understand that, of course, we can talk about outside influences of Russia and whoever, China, because even when China is launching Belt and Road Initiative, some people are seeing that as a threat in this part of the world. When Russians are coming here with more presence in economic sense, some other people are seeing that as a threat, which is fine. I don't mind. But the point is that we are not in a problem because someone is coming here more, especially when someone is coming more with economic influence. We are in a problem where we are not ourselves fighting and living and promoting the values that this society can make be stable. The concept of multi-ethnicity, multiculturality, shared society, inclusive society here in Bosnia, in Balkan, and in broader context in European sense. So my point is very simple. Instead of European Union and USA are thinking about some other influences they don't like so much, I call them to come here more and be present here more in helping us to integrate in Euro-Atlantic integrations in as quickest and possible, most quick and most efficient way. So today, European Union is with new Western Balkan initiative that is opening the path that we, by 2025, may be basically the members of European Union. This is something that we have to do as much as possible to do as a major homework, major exercise, and try to have Europe here more substantially present.
Okay.
Financially, with technical aid, not giving us some bureaucratic things, but give us a fast track to get fulfilling European standards, especially in the things that are connected with Chapter 23 and 24, which is fight against organized crime, corruption, and come here with more investments, and come here with European values, not trying to please us around our old fights and trying to please ethnic leaders.
You have to a large extent
civil society in this part of the world.
Partly answered one of the questions that I was going to get into, which is how perhaps to fix the problem or how to avoid further problems. But when it comes to the first point, let me put this one to you, Neven. Do you not see a danger in the fact that an entire generation has grown up not knowing conflict and therefore might not look to the European Union as NATO and NATO as the safety net that it needs, and might be looking elsewhere perhaps towards outside influences in the East, Russia in particular?
I think there are three issues here. One is the new generation growing up through different educational systems and not knowing the others, and not actually having interest to learn about the others, to get to know the others. But whilst they are growing up, army of unemployed, very high rates of unemployment are there. Emigration is present every year from each of the countries in the Western Balkans. Around 50,000 people, small town of 50,000 people is disappearing and so on. And they might be potential army from which to mobilize with some radical ideas, focusing whether to the east or to the west. Another issue that I see is the contest of two models, liberal democracy versus illiberal democracy. And it's not necessarily just looking towards Russia. It's looking, we have model of Putin, we have model of Erdogan, we have model of Orban, of Poland, and we have little Orbans in the region governing.
We're talking about strong leaders here.
Strong leaders, and it does seem, they are elected by popular will. It does seem that the population that is actually bothering to vote supports this kind of model. And this is the crisis for Western liberal democracy being attractive enough, because local population are disappointed, nothing to offer. You're not joining NATO, you're not joining European Union, they're moving away to a different model.
This is perhaps what we're seeing, isn't it? You know, being pulled in two different directions.
Yeah, and I think that the European Union, to some extent, have traded stability for democracy. So, for example, in Montenegro, you have presidential elections coming up very soon. The person who's likely to win the presidential elections is Milo Djukanovic, who has essentially been in power with the odd sabbatical, either as prime minister or president, since 1991. His party, the DPS, are by far the strongest party in Montenegro. This kind of pattern that Neven alluded to.
But for those that don't know, what sort of character would he be when you say he's been in power for all of those years, in terms of what would his rule be like? Yeah, we'll come to you in just a moment. Zlatko, I can see you want to jump in, but let me just finish this point with Kenneth.
Djukanovic's party, the Democratic Party of Socialists, are by far the strongest, best funded political party in Montenegro, and they were the successor to the Montenegrin League of Communists, who dissolved in 1990.
So rather than being a liberal party, they are more inclined to be from the other side of the spectrum.
It depends.
Fair enough.
Whether we're talking about how they deal with their opponents, their political opponents, or how they deal with the public.
Okay, well, I think we're getting into a little bit too much detail at that particular point. Zlatko, you wanted to jump in. I'll give you the opportunity to do so right now. You wanted to respond to something you've just heard from here, I think.
I want to come back to the issue of, I agree with liberal, illiberal democracies, that's an issue. But I think the major issue in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Balkan, as well as in Europe, is actually, do we live and do we want to live all together basic European values which are embodied in the European Convention of Human Rights and Freedoms? Do we want to promote segregated and exclusive societies, or do we want to promote shared and inclusive societies? And that's what Europe has to be more present in here and help us to speed up this process. And I think that it is very important that I was very happy when I heard yesterday Prime Minister of Bulgaria, who is chairing the European Union, in Mostar, who is saying that without Western Balkan being part of European Union, we all together in a region, from Slovenia to Greece, may be getting into the big mess, I won't say a war. And when we heard yesterday Juncker saying that no country in Balkan can escape from a misery if we do not come faster in European Union, and European Union has to finish this process, I think we have to focus on that. Promoting European values in here, not pleasing ethnophobic and ethnocentric leaders.
And then what is the most important thing to be done to avoid what's happened in the past, to avoid repeating the errors, mistakes?
Basically opening up to the area, showing the will to get them integrated into the Europe, recognize diversity that is present in the region, and allowing it to fully integrate into Europe. The values are already there, present. The values might change, and this is the danger of the outside influence of what is described by some as malign influence in the region, and this is the way to prevent the potential for the conflicts in the region.
We have a European Council Western Balkans summit coming up.
Yes, I mean, Britain, this kind of post-Brexit vote, Britain, they are showing renewed interest in the Balkans. Kenneth was part of the mission on behalf of the House of Lords.
I'm going to come to you just to wrap up this programme, Kenneth. Churchill said the Balkans produce more history than they can consume. The danger of that is what, and how can it be avoided? You've got very little time, I'm afraid.
I would have to say I think Britain's shown a very positive or intends to play a positive role after Brexit. So the Foreign and Commonwealth Office have committed to spending more money in the region. It's in everyone's interests, our Euro-Atlantic partners and the UK as well, that this region remains stable. I think Zlatko Lagumdzija is absolutely right. I think the Europeans took their eye off the ball for a few years, and it allowed the space for others to move in. Now, what we need is Brussels to be much more affirmative about the European future of the Western Balkans countries. There needs to be a clear roadmap. And they have the opportunity to do that now before things become too unstable. And I hope that Brussels will show that kind of initiative. It's very good news that Britain is hosting the Western Balkans Summit in July. I'd also say that the Berlin process, which was, of course, initiated by Brussels, has shown some positive results already. So the demarcation deal between Montenegro and Kosovo has come to fruition, and that process seems to be bearing fruit. So I think it's important that Brussels, the European Union, remains engaged in the region.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all of you. YouTube is where you can find this in a couple of days' time if you're not able to watch it live. Leave your comments there, good and bad. We'll listen to both. But thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining this discussion about the Balkans, an area which is, we know from events at the early part of the 20th century, led to some extent to the start of the First World War. Those terrible events much later in the 20th century saw so many lives lost. If the focus at least is on what is happening there now, hopefully those events will not be repeated again. It is sunny, I'm told, in Sarajevo. Let us hope it's not just the weather that is bright in the future for that region. I'm David Foster. Thank you for watching Roundtable. From me and all of my guests, goodbye for now.